Hi, good evening. My name is Chris Batchelor, and this is my project for general ecology. This is the Microcosm project, and it's based off of Sumter Pond, just a local pond here in Sumter, South Carolina. Let me- for the overview, this presentation is to observe and study the life cycle of a miniature ecosystem. The focus is to see how, in a controlled environment, the addition of local pond soil, pond water, and grass from the water and microorganisms can effectively thrive in an enclosed container. So my hypothesis was going into this project, I believe that with the right amount of sunlight, the plants in the microcosm will grow and supply a food source for the organisms, which will in turn create waste to enrich the soil, which will then provide nutrients for the plant life. That's what I thought I was going to get going into this project. You'll see at the end of the project, it was a little different than what I was expecting. So my methods and materials, all materials were gathered from, like I said, just a local pond here in Sumter, South Carolina. For my container, I used a big Hawaiian punch container, which was roughly 231 cubic inches in volume. I was able to get about 7.5 centimeters of soil from the pond around the shore. And then I used watergrass. I was able to uproot some watergrass from underneath the water to put in the container, and then in a separate container I had to use that to fill it with water, because I had to cut the top of my first container open in order to get the grass inside of it, because the opening at the top just wasn't big enough. So I collected the water in a different container, and then once I got home and was able to move the grass to the container I was going to use, then I filled it up with water and then used some waterproof silicone sealant to reattach the top of the container. This experiment was for roughly 7 weeks of observation. The biome was placed in a windowsill that received the most daylight in my house, in order to, for the plants to receive that ample sunlight. It got roughly 5 hours of direct sunlight a day. So for observation and data, week one, sunny conditions. This was day one, week one. The water was still very murky due to the soil, the sediment being still stirred up from placing the grass into the container, and the water as well. The soil, it was a sandy loam. When I was digging up, it was actually pretty tough because I just used a small garden trowel to get under the surface of the water, but it was actually pretty solid digging it up. But when I had it in my hand, I was kind of crumbling it to get it into the container, and it fell apart rather easily. For autotrophs, that would be the grass that I planted in the container. And as far as heterotrophs, that kind of went back to my original hypothesis of, or at least my original intent, to capture at least some sort of organism, whether it be snails or small shrimp or tadpoles, something of that nature that I would be able to see with the naked eye. Let's see. This was week one. Week 2, you can see there's still sunny conditions. The water's still a little murky, but it did clear up quite a bit in between that week 1 and that week 2. Um, you can start to see the grass a little better underneath the water, but there's still no signs of any organisms. Week 3, uh, most of the heavy sedimentation had uh, sank to the bottom. The water was still fairly just a little cloudy. I could still see the grass below the water as well as a bit above the water, but still no sign of heterotrophs at this time. Week 4, same texture with the soil, the light conditions. I was pretty lucky because throughout this entire experiment, we had a lot of sunlight. There were very few overcast days, so this sample got an ample amount of sunlight throughout this entire experiment. You can see the water is getting clearer and clearer every week. Still a little bit of haze to it, but you can clearly see the root systems of the grass in the soil, as well as any kind of small leaves that were beginning to come up on some of the vegetation. But unfortunately, still no live organisms in the container. So week 5, again, sunny conditions, plenty of daylight. The water is clear now. The sediment has gone to the bottom. So for the grass, it had begun to actually grow rather quickly. It filled up most of the area underneath the water, and it was starting to grow quite a bit above the water, which was great. Upon a suggestion from the professor of this course, I used a very bright flashlight to try to see if I could see any sort of organisms swimming around the water or maybe in the soil. I squeezed the bottom of the container without trying to disrupt the soil too much to see if maybe releasing any small air pockets I could see any worms or any other kind of organisms, but I never saw any. Week 6, you can see the grass is doing very well under the water and above the water. There was actually a lot of condensation built up on the inside, a lot of moisture on the blades of the grass protruding above the water, as well as on the inside of the container. And the final week, here we have the final week of the project. This is where my biome is as far as growth. You can see that the grass below the water is super dense. It didn't really spend too much time on the top side of the water. That hasn't grown out as much as I thought it would. But the plant growth underneath the water just continues to rise. Like I said, I never had any signs of any organisms though in the experiment. So what happened in the microcosm experiment? The microcosm was replicated in the container as close to its natural state in the pond. An ample amount of soil and water were added in order to support any vegetation and organism life. Did my observations support my hypothesis? Yes and no. I was really my original hypothesis was really including any capture of life from any organisms, but unfortunately that didn't happen. However, as stated throughout this presentation, the plant life did very well, and it continues to grow. So the microcosms in context, I guess the biggest concept in our learning in this course applied to this was the adaptation to a new environment, specifically the the native pond grass here in South Carolina, as it was transferred from a living pond with organisms and room to grow and oxygenated water to a closed off container sitting on my windowsill in my office. Um, there was a ample amount of soil and water from the pond that was transported, and I tried to leave it as much air as I could for at least there to be some sort of moisture build up for the plant life above the surface. Um, so without the natural elements of the pond, it was very unclear whether the grass would survive or not in this artificial environment. So, but during experiment, like I said, continue to grow, and life is still thriving inside of this biome. Further research, further hypothesis, what I test, I would love to be able to test different conditions in the microcosm, such as less water or less soil, um, and different types of light if I had moved it to a different part of the room, or if I had set up two microcosms, one with artificial light, like a lamp, and one with natural light. How would the life inside of this biome survive or compared to the other? Next, what I would do to improve this project, honestly, I would just really love to capture some living organisms, like I said, such as worms, snails, tiny shrimp, something that I could see that would have supported my original hypothesis of the life cycle inside that biome. Um, I think it would have been more accurately measured if that one part of this experiment had been there. Looking beyond my individual microcosm, how is microcosm study relevant to general ecology? Well, it lets us take a controlled area, Microsoft models of environment that we can control the input and limitations inside the microcosm that will yield possible different outcomes of the organisms being studied. So it lets us adjust things to how we want the cause and effect of what we're looking for in these experiments. In practical use, scientists, ecologists use microcosms all the time to see, hey, if we apply this different value to the experiment, how can it positively or negatively change the effect of the life inside of this microcosm? So this is my presentation. Thank you for listening, and I really enjoyed this. I'm going to keep my microcosm around for quite a while after this because I'm totally invested. I love checking it out every day when I get home from work to see what kind of new life there is. So this is definitely going to be sitting in my windowsill for quite a while. And I might actually just do another one because I had so much fun doing this one. So thank you and have a great day.